Değerli katılımcılarımız, kongremizin ikinci gününde tekrar birlikteyiz. Moderatörlüğünü Prof.Dr. Yaşar KONDAKÇI'nin yapacağı, Doç.Dr. Deniz ÖRÜCÜ, Doç.Dr. Khalid ARAR, Doç.Dr. Fuller'ın katılımıyla gerçekleştirecek olan eğitimde sosyal adalet konulu panelimizde sizleri baş başa bırakıyoruz.
Using our slides.
I will let you know, Kay.
We are in streamlining now.
Okay, shall we start?
I can try now. Thank you.
And Kay, if you like, I can share your slides, but then you have to let me know when I shall go to the next slide. Otherwise, you can share your own slides with screen sharing. Okay, I will share. All right. So you will.
I can share mine.
Okay, and Deniz, you will share your slides.
Yes, I'll share mine.
Okay. So I think we can start, right? İlyas Bey?
Yes, dear professor, you can start.
Okay. Very much welcome to our invited speaker session, panel session on social justice leadership in education. We have three prominent scholars from different countries. We have Kay Fuller from the United Kingdom. We have Khalid. He is from Palestine but affiliated with Texas State University. And we have Deniz ÖRÜCÜ from Başkent University. I would like to briefly introduce all three speakers with the speaking order, and then we will start with a speech of Deniz. Each speaker will have 15 minutes, and then after we finish all of the speeches, we will have a Q&A session. Our first speaker is Deniz ÖRÜCÜ. Deniz ÖRÜCÜ is an associate professor in educational leadership and policy at Başkent University, Faculty of Education, Department of Educational Science in Turkey. Her research interests are epistemological underpinnings of education and leadership field, refugee schools and leadership, emotion management in education, higher education, education policy change management, and qualitative research methodology. Her latest research covers education policy and educational leadership in Syrian refugee schools, the school leaders' policy mediation styles in different countries, and educational leadership within complex and challenging settings and privatization of education. She is the co-convener for Turkey in Network 26 of European Educational Research Association. Network 26 is the network for educational leadership. The second speaker, Khalid ARAR. Khalid is also an associate professor of educational leadership and policy at School Improvement Doctoral Program, College of Education at Texas State University, and he is an associate editor of the International Journal of Leadership in Education, editor of the Journal of Educational Administration and History, and a member of editorial boards for Journal of Education Administration, Leadership and Policy in Schools, International Journal of Educational Management, Higher Education Policy, Applied Research in Higher Education. Khalid is also a member of UCA Center for the Study of International School Leadership. For the past 2 decades, he conducted studies in the Middle East, Europe, and North America on the issues of equity, diversity, and social justice in K-12 and higher education. His recent books include Migrants, Refugees, and Global Challenges in Higher Education, which is published by Peter Lang with Haj Yahya, David Ross, and me, Yaşar KONDAKÇI. Education, Immigration, and Migration, Policy, Leadership, and Practice for Changing World. This book is published with Emerald, together with Jeffrey Brooks and Ira Bogoch. Third book is Turbulence, Empowerment, and Marginalization in International Education Governance Systems, which is again published with Emerald, together with Alison Tyson. And finally, School Leadership for Refugees Education, which is published by Routledge. The third speaker is Kay Fuller. Kay is also an associate professor of educational leadership and management. She works in the Center for Research in Educational Leadership and Management at the University of Nottingham. Her research interests center on social justice in education and educational leadership, specifically researching the connections between leader-learner identities. She focuses on gender in educational leadership, including research on the distribution of women secondary school head teachers in the United Kingdom, women and men's construction of identity among school populations, and the use of a variety of feminist theories, including intersectionality theory. She is a member of International Women Leading Education Network and regional leader for Women at East Midlands. Kay was an elected member of Belmas Council for 5 years, research coordinator, and remains co-convener for Gender and Leadership Research Interest Group. She is a former English teacher and deputy head teacher of mixed comprehensive schools and initial teacher educator in secondary English education. And she currently leads the MA program in educational leadership and management at the University of Nottingham. After this brief introduction of our very esteemed speakers, I would like to invite Deniz ÖRÜCÜ to deliver her speech on social justice in education. Deniz, the word is yours, please.
Thank you, Yaşar. I would like to thank PEGAM and the conference organizers for inviting us for this panel. I hope the audience would benefit from what we'll be discussing today. And it's very nice to see my friends and colleagues here at the same time. Today, I would like to talk about the general concepts of social justice, to familiarize the audience who haven't been familiar before, very briefly, and then I'll move on to the issues in Turkish context, considering educational leadership and management in terms of social justice. So I'll share my screen. Can you see it? Okay. So before actually social justice debates as a concept dates back to Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, and other philosophers in the years by. And it was first used by Taparelli of Sicily, a religious person. I will keep this part short, but the theory of justice in 1920s and in 1970s was first developed by the philosopher John Rawls, and what he described was he describes a society of free citizens holding equal basic rights and cooperating with an egalitarian economic system. So his focus was on justice as fairness, and this requires a just arrangement of the major political and social institutions of a liberal society. So it is actually based on self-respect across the society in terms of distribution of political, constitutional, the legal system, and economic resources and social institutions. So arrangement of these institutions are society's basic structure. So there are loads of questions which arises from here. These are who will have which basic rights, who will receive social recognition, who will have opportunities, get what kind of work, and the distribution of income and wealth. These are still being discussed, as you already know, in our contemporary society. Actually, as we all know, 21st century is marked by crisis, wars, violence, and recently pandemic, and it is at global level, and which brings up heightened interest in social justice, distribution of resources, and it brings a lot of issues about equality, equity, diversity, inclusion, etc. These are all actually hot topics to discuss.
Deniz, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you turn your slides into full screen? Full screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is it okay? Okay. So in one of the tweets I came across recently, this was actually a summary of what we have been going through in terms of reconceptualizing such hot words like diversity, inclusion, belonging. It says diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Belonging is dancing like no one is watching. There is quite a sharp difference actually in across these concepts. And social justice is actually about such concepts. So when we look at two principles of justice as fairness, first principle is about each person has the same indefeasible claim to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic liberties and compatible with the same scheme of liberties for all. And second principle is about social and economic inequalities are to satisfy two conditions. First condition is they are to be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality and opportunity, and they are to be to the greatest benefit of the least. This means advantaged members of society. We call this difference principle. Actually, this is the one very much related with social justice conceptualization. So, it is very difficult to describe social justice as we all experience as scholars, and the literature also tells the same thoughts, points to the same issues. It is elusive. It is an under-theorized concept, still very difficult to define. There is no single approved description of it, ever-changing. It is very cultural, and it's an umbrella term with multiple meanings. And here the context is highly important, and construction of social justice is dependent on the context, and it has with perspectives inextricably linked to social context within which models of justice make sense to the people involved. So such concepts like equality, inequality, affirmative action, and like diversity, inclusion, they are all shaped by the context in which they take place in. So something unequal as inequality in Turkey may not be considered as inequality in Africa or elsewhere. That's, as we always say, as educational researchers, context is the main driver of all our actions and thoughts. So as our colleague Ira Bogoch cautions us, there are no right or objective models for leadership or social justice, but all efforts must be deliberately and continuously reinvented and critiqued. So there are some dynamics which leads us to question social justice issues, such as poverty, racism, gender, policy, political action, economy, and culture. There are loads of definitions, but when we look at the conceptualization of Novak, he says it is a specific habit of justice that is social in two senses. Here I highlighted the important, significant parts. The first thing is it requires a broader range of social skills than do acts of individual justice. So what is social about social justice is it is not about individuality. Actually, it is in contrast with the 21st century ways of living. And it aims at the good of the city, not at the good of one agent only. So it is about actually collaboration, as we call it, and we have in Turkey we have a very nice, we used to have a very nice tradition of imece, which is translated into English as collaboration. However, it was something like as you see it here, citizens may get together in the modern city to hold a bake sale for some charitable cause, to repair a playground, to clean up the environment, and for a million of other purposes that their social imaginations might lead them to. This is what we had very strongly in Turkish culture, especially in rural areas, where all the villagers came together and helped each other and assisted and supported each other. Actually, the very premise of social justice, I believe, lies in that, in such behavior. So I will just skip the other definitions of social justice and concerns, and I will move on to what is social justice and educational leadership, why it is important. So we are all very much aware that leadership has a strong impact on academic achievement and educational excellence, and we all agree about the role of the leaders. There is no need to discuss that. So how about social justice in educational leadership? It is a deliberate intervention that requires the moral use of force. So it is about social justice leaders move beyond equality debates to equity debates and set out to change systems, processes, and structures to better respond to the needs of students. So there are some frameworks to explain social justice leadership. One of which is the very famous one by Cribb and Gewirtz, and they propose three kinds of social justice as distributive or economic justice, cultural justice, associational justice. Meanwhile, Woods and Roberts added a fourth type as developmental justice, which is a commitment to develop people's full capacities. Fraser's very famous social justice framework is about redistribution, recognition, and representation. So it is about redistribution is about the economic aspect of equitable distribution of resources. Recognition refers to the cultural and symbolic aspect. There are three forms of misrecognition in the society. These are cultural domination, non-recognition, and disrespect. And representation is about political injustices across the community and society. Theor is another very prominent scholar in social justice studies, talks about 7 core qualities of leaders in education. He proposes that school leaders should acquire a broad, reconceptualized consciousness, knowledge, and skill base in terms of such concepts like diversity, equity, equality. These are very easy to say concepts, but it is tough to achieve them. They need to possess core leadership traits, advance inclusion, access, and opportunity for all, improve the core learning context in terms of teaching and curriculum, create a climate of belonging, raise student achievement, and sustain themselves professionally and personally. When we read such stuff, it is amazing that how difficult for school leaders to attain all those qualities. It is actually a problematic terrain. Most of the time I feel that school leaders or teachers are expected to create miracles. So in terms of social justice leadership, research in general says, talks about other qualities of leaders: empathy, passion, persistence, flexible thinking, creativity, moral responsibility, ethics of care, commitment, vision, and they need to have a sense-making and agency to deal with all the issues that they are going through to maintain social justice for all students and staff and community. It is really a tough job. It is easy to say maybe by researchers, being us, but it is not easy to achieve. When we move on to Turkish experience in research and practice, we all know that Turkish constitution provides and suggests officially, the equal provision of education for all students across the country and equal benefits they derive, the equal capacity of students and homogeneity in school improvement models employed across all schools. This is because we have a centralized education system whereby the legislation and the constitution supports the equal provision of education for all. However, the limited authority of school principals and the limited forms of school autonomy is a barrier for school principals to perform social justice leadership. So there are no legally defined rules for this, and the school leaders are not officially accountable for social justice practices on paper. In terms of research, actually it is limited and sparse. However, we have that endeavor especially in the last 10 years by prominent scholars like Yaşar KONDAKÇI, Kadir Beycioğlu, Selahattin Turan, who have been very much involved with exploring social justice practices in Turkish schools. Although we have an exemplary institution in the 30s and 40s in Turkey, we call village institutes, which promoted democracy, equality for the disadvantaged village students, and it was kind of a revolutionary school system. It is strange that we started to explore social justice in the last 10-15 years in Turkey. How about Turkish school principals, barriers?
Deniz, you have 1 minute, please.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Turkish school principles and barriers for social justice implementations. We know that from research, they have inadequate resources. There is lack of policies that promote inclusiveness in education and curriculum. lack of pre-service and in-service training for leaders and teachers for social justice. We realized that they focus more on technical aspects of school as organizations. Traditional and conservative groups in the school community may emerge as barriers. They face parental and staff resistance. And when we look at the summary of findings, I mean, I just wanted to briefly summarize the review of social justice research in Turkey. So they, most of the time, act based on their personal values, commitment, discretion, sense-making. And actually, while more than half of the principals employ bureaucratic style. It is totally about the value systems, religious beliefs, and individual histories that shape their notion and implementation of social justice. It is based on personal effort. They are, in the same time, they battle with systemic inequalities and inequities, while in their notion of social justice, most of the time, they focus on the economical aspect of the issue, but not really about the diversity, marginal groups, other disadvantages in student population like gender, LGBT, marginal disadvantaged groups, refugees, etc. Unless you work in a refugee school in Turkey, you don't really know about it. Or unless you have an LGBT student, you don't really know about it. Some of them just ignore it. But most of their focus is on redistribution. And community engagement, although we have that tradition of collaboration from old days, community engagement is very rare in schools, especially in public schools. So I put some samples from our different research, but I will just skip them. There are some questions to ponder about in such unprecedented times. So we have COVID-19, a new brand new crisis. We have technology, and this, I believe, widening the gap. It widens the gap in participation and access in Turkey, whereby only 70% of the Turkish students have access to internet, according to the latest OECD report. While social injustices endure in the society and for students, how about the injustices for teachers, school principals, and other school staff? While they are battling with performance measures, especially in private schools, where there is high parental pressure, low pay, and we have to think about the concerns of private school parents and those in the peripheries with no little access to education, because this is really hitting me in the last year, I mean, in the recent years, because this shows us how sharp the gap is between different social classes. So I would like you to, and I to ponder about these questions. Maybe we'll have time to discuss after all the presentations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Deniz. Thanks a lot. Deniz introduced the concept of social justice. Actually, she started with the philosophical basis, and then she introduced the key framework that we use in order to conceptualize, in order to work, study social justice. And she ended with the brief summary of the challenges actually we face in social justice leadership in Turkish context. So I think Deniz will be able to answer the questions on these dimensions of her speech. Now I would like to continue with Khalid, but Khalid, can you hear us? Oh, okay. So, Kay, if you are ready, we can continue with your presentation. I will share your presentation. Okay. So if you are ready, we can start, we can continue with your presentation, please.
Thank you. Can I just check that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Very good.
Thank you. And that's great. Thank you very much indeed. So, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak at your conference. Obviously, I would have liked to come to visit Turkey. I haven't been to Turkey for some years, and I was really looking forward to coming in April and catching up with all my friends. And so I'm sorry that we can't be together in person, but I think that this is a great opportunity for us to see how well we can do these sorts of events online, and maybe we can do these things more often. So thank you for inviting me and including me. So I want to say something about how my work fits into the theme of this panel, social justice in education. Can you go to slide 2, please? Yes. In the main, my work has focused on the identities of leaders, educators, and learners. I'm interested in how we use our identities to make connections, how we use our funds of knowledge and identity to make leading and learning relevant to one another. That is an asset-based perspective. But I'm also interested in how our identities lead us to be marginalised in the education system and wider society. And Deniz got us thinking about some of the people who are indeed marginalised. That marginalisation leads to social injustice in terms of educational and social outcomes, with the accrual of privilege for some and disadvantage for others. So I want to introduce myself as a learner, educator, leader, researcher. This identity gives me multiple perspectives. I've written about this in a critical autoethnography published earlier this year. I came to teaching late after a career in retail management. I have taught English in 5 different high schools, where I was also head of English, deputy head teacher, and school governor. I've trained English teachers and currently teach on the Master's Programme in Educational Leadership and Management at the University of Nottingham, as you heard in my introduction. I teach using a number of modes, such as distance learning and face-to-face with part-time and full-time students. I'm fortunate to learn from students working in education and leadership across the world. I'm a member of International Network of Scholars Women Leading Education, a founding co-convener of the Belmas Gender and Leadership Research Interest Group, and a regional network leader for the social media-based grassroots movement, Women Ed, which is now a global movement, and obviously a lot of their activities started online and are now being forced back online. So I speak from a range of perspectives as someone who teaches and has done leadership in schools, who does leadership in the academy, in the scholarly community, and in teaching professional activism. I speak as someone who has researched in gender and leadership for about 2 decades. Can you go to slide 3, please? I want to focus on perspectives in this short talk, because I'm currently writing a book called Feminist Perspectives on Contemporary Educational Leadership that's currently under contract with Routledge. Even though I understand that feminism is a problematic word in some contexts, I want to be clear that I identify as a feminist. That means I have an interest in securing gender justice. In the first instance, that's how I see social justice, through the lens of gender. However, it would be wrong for me to suggest that I see the world in essentialist terms. Gender is socially constructed. So gender justice will be differently understood in different contexts and circumstances. And that speaks to what Deniz was saying about how social justice is seen in different contexts and different circumstances. Both women and men experience powerlessness and powerfulness at different times because of the circumstances in which they find themselves. Sometimes they experience both simultaneously for different reasons. When we focus on the experience of women, it can sound as if we take an essentialist approach. As Spivak in 1990-1993 has said, that might be necessary as a strategy to mobilize for social justice. But a strategic pluralist approach, as Blackmore in 1999 says, is also necessary to work for justice on multiple fronts. So there's no single feminist perspective. That means I'm currently working with a range of theories, including intersectionality theory, Islamic feminism and femo-nationalism, queer theory, digital feminism, men's pro-feminism, and applied critical leadership perspectives to think about social justice in education and in employment in education. Largely, but not solely in the English context. The research projects that inform my work include some participants in international contexts. So an intersectional feminist approach recognizes that women's and men's, girls and boys' life chances, their educational and social outcomes vary depending on a range of characteristics and factors. Excuse me. In the UK, anti-discrimination legislation is designed to protect people from discrimination because of the following characteristics: age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. It's common to use these characteristics when we are thinking about social injustice. The protections apply in education and employment in both public and private sectors. What's less common is recognizing the characteristics not protected by legislation, such as physical size, height, weight. In a couple of research interviews fairly recently, one woman talked about her height, as in being very tall, seemed to be problematic for the men with whom she worked, and they treated her in a particular way. And another woman talked about her weight being problematic, that actually someone posted a very offensive picture of a fat person and put her name and a rude comment next to it on the staff room wall. We're talking about professionals in schools doing this. This was not children misbehaving, this was colleagues. Another one is ill health, and that's around physical and mental ill health, and access to resources such as coaching and mentoring. So I frame intersectional discrimination as a person's experience of discrimination for a combination of characteristics, for example, sex and race, or pregnancy and maternity and race. It cannot be denied that Islamophobia exists in the UK. So I have drawn on conceptualizations of the relationship between Islam and gender by thinking about the rejection of feminism or the appropriation of feminism by Islamic scholars. Having interviewed Muslim women head teachers leading schools in education in England, I have concluded that Islamic feminism was not a particularly useful framework. The women were not working in Islamic faith schools and were possibly cautious about what they said about how far their religion and faith influenced their leadership. The same would be said about Christian head teachers leading non-faith schools. So we have this pretense in the UK that there's no connection between religion and education. It's not actually true. Religious education is still a compulsory subject in the English curriculum, and whole school assemblies are meant to have a Christian character. But schools can apply to be taken out of that. And so a school that serves a largely Muslim population could have an Islamic character, even though it's a non-faith school. So we kind of pretend that there's nothing going on around religious identity, and I think that's hugely problematic. And it's quite difficult to get people to talk about their religious faith and how that impacts on their leadership. These women did describe the discrimination they faced in the English education system as school children when they went to school, as teachers and as head teachers. In 2014, there was furore about how schools were being led that served Muslim children in the city where I live. Islamophobic politicians, journalists, and educators used gender justice as an argument to undermine the Muslim educators and leaders in those schools. Ultimately, the scandal and disruption undermined the children's achievements. Femo-nationalism has enabled me to see how people in right-wing politics I think I was just muted, so I don't know if you heard what I just said. I'm going to repeat that paragraph if that's okay.
We missed one or two sentences, Kay. Thank you.
So I was talking about the scandal and disruption in some schools that were serving Muslim children in the city where I live. And femo-nationalism has enabled me to see how people in right-wing politics appropriate arguments for gender justice to further marginalise ethnic minority communities. In the last 2 decades, there's been an improvement in recognising diverse sexualities and genders in education in the UK. Despite that, some educators and leaders remain fearful of speaking up about homophobia and transphobia in the workplace. Using queer theory in my work has enabled me to recognise just how easy it is for a researcher to see the world in very narrow ways, as a heterosexual woman, for example. One project that has been particularly successful for women educators internationally is the Women Ed movement for women serving and aspiring leaders in education. Although they began online, many events are held offline normally, not at the moment, of course. Their first global online conference is being held the weekend beginning October the 2nd. My research into that movement uses digital feminism to think about how men treat women online. The movement had to respond to detractors and supporters alike. In particular, pro-feminist men gave reasons for their support based on women's and girls' experiences of gender injustices. So they talked about women and their families. They talked about their wives and their children, the girls and their girls, and why they believed in justice for women and girls. But they also based their responses on a sense of social responsibility to do the right thing. In some cases, they were willing to relinquish their male privilege by refusing to sit on all-male panels at education conferences. And I'm smiling because I have seen that Denise and I are the only 2 women panelists at this conference, with 16 panelists in total. So I'm smiling because Denise and I are on the same panel, and I'm delighted that we are. Finally, I want to say something about Santa Maria and Santa Maria's 2012 Applied Critical Leadership work. Theirs is a strong framework underpinned by theoretical perspectives such as critical race theory and transformative leadership theory, for example. I'm using that to think about how women head teachers of global majority heritages, as Black and Asian women, use their own funds of knowledge and identity to work with children and young people and their funds of knowledge and identity. I'm currently working with a doctoral student who is also looking at white educators' capacity for educating children of different racial and ethnic heritages, again drawing on funds of knowledge to do so. For me, there's no point in thinking about educational leadership and the leaders who do it if we do not keep in mind the purpose of leadership in educating children, young people and adults, in preparing them to make a contribution to society. If leadership in educational settings, the people who hold positions of power, is not fully representative of the population at school, community, regional and national levels, learners are not presented with the full range of possibilities open to them in their futures. I'm afraid this has been something of a race through some of my current work, but I'll be pleased to answer further questions. The next slide has got the references.
Yes, these are the references. Kay, thank you very much. I think there will be several questions on your inspiring speech. Kay just introduced the importance of holding multiple perspectives to think about social justice and raised especially the importance of intersectional narrative theory for thinking about social justice issues in educational setting. Khalid, if you are ready, we can continue with your presentation. Khalid, can you unmute, please? Yes. Yes, we are with you. Thank you.
Yaşar, are you uploading the presentation or should I upload it?
If you like, I can share it or you can share.
Okay, so can you share it?
All right. Can you see it, Khalid?
Yes. Can you see me?
Yes. All fine, we can start.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. Thank you, Yaşar. Thank you, the organizers, and Deniz, for including me. So in this presentation, I want to problematize the social injustice and justice education. And in doing so, I will present first my personal story, because when we speaking about social justice, we need to position ourselves, and of course, by then, from this positioning, to explore our lens and the issues that we want to discuss. Then I want to move to the scholarship of social justice, critique the scholarship of social justice, and then we'll touch upon advocacy and boundaries. So if you can move for the next slide. So as you can see, I will start with the personal, then I'll try to problematize the social and social justice, then to discuss the scholarship boundaries and promoting social justice within the Imperium. So if you can move it, please. So Speaking about myself, as Yaşar presented me, I'm a Palestinian, fourth age, uprooted indigenous from our own land. I can say that our village has been demolished. So this is one lens to look into social justice issues. The other lens is that I have been a school principal for more than a decade. And from this lens and within this intersectionality, both as bringing my story, my identity, and then also my experience, I moved to look into gender and equity in my society. So this is why I examined the social and social justice education. So I moved to speak about gender and equity. Are women allowed to reach what? Are there enough access or equally access? So these were my main topics of research, both research and praxis. And from there, I tried to examine the theory into practice of social justice when speaking about equity in school processes and practices, equity in power sharing within K-12 education system and within higher education system. So I questions policies, I questions leadership, and I questioned praxis as well of both access, acceptance, inclusion, and participation in both K-12 and higher ed systems. So from there, I moved to rethink and to examine social justice in developed societies. I mean, these terms that have been developed, and we'll see in the next slide, that have been developed in Anglophonic cultures, how they fit and how they and how they can describe our societies. And from there, I moved to examine social justice in real life. And one of the real life was researching social justice in education and for refugees education and other vulnerable and war-torn people. If you look to this presentation, you'll see my scholarship, and it's of course much more than that, but you know, in 2013, after publishing more than 16 papers speaking about women in leadership, Arab women in leadership, women leadership and social justice, I published a book in 2013 speaking about women's life stories, while challenging social injustice in agrarian and in developed societies. And from there, I moved to research social justice terms and how they are applied to other social circumstances, to other social features. And from there, we tend to research the refugees' education. And as you can see, we have two volumes consisted of 58 different scholars from the globe. And Yaşar was one of my co-editors of one of these volumes, explored issues of social justice and equity and access and inclusion for in higher education systems. And with Ira Boguch and Jeffrey Brooks, I have another volume and another special issue, which was the first special issue in the globe to question educational leadership for refugees, displaced, and war-torn people. And I edited this with Deniz ÖRÜCÜ and also with Duncan Waite from Texas State. And when we moved to another special issue dealing with schools in challenging circumstances, while focusing also in refugees, underprivileged, vulnerable people. So if you can move, please. As you can see, the main events and trends of social justice scholarship and main definitions and terms, I had different main works since the 2013 with different people. I can say that one of the papers were with Kadir and with Izaro Platka. And in another main paper with Izaro Platka, we questioned issues of social justice and main terms of social justice when applying them from Anglophonic societies to developed societies. And we have another also forthcoming work with Sedat and Oplatka and myself, where we examine the distribution of this theory, where it started and how it ended up to date. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Here you can see I try to divide for you in the new area how the issue of equity, equality, and social justice developed. So first, it is very attached to public schools foundations. As you can see, it started with John Dewey asking questions about advocacy and educational community. So the issues that has been started there, equal distribution, when we speak about public education, equal opportunities, and of course, critical thinking. Then the shift towards gender gap issues, fineness and fairness, and of course, due to three waves of feminist feminist social movements, both in the US, the UK, and Australia, mainly in Anglophonic societies. So the issue of diversity became in the fore, and of course, issues of equity, gender and leadership, and administration and access to administration for both genders started to arise. Then the examining of power structure, centralization versus decentralization, school choices, shared leadership and styles, and all issues of equity of use of power started in the 80s, and toward 2000s we started to examine with the move, the shift to neoliberal education. We started to research inclusion for disadvantaged communities and social justice practices. And we have seen this in the last waves of anti-racist movements around the globe. So in the next slide, you can see where it has been started in a paper with Sedat and with Izaro Platka, which is to be published very soon. We see that it is started in the United States, Australia, Kingdom, and other countries that is highly related to these countries, other controlled. So they are out, they are part of the imperial. Hong Kong, Cyprus, New Zealand. So within these societies, within these entities, the issue of social justice research started in the 80s. Then it moved to other societies, as you can see, until that newly has been discussed in transitional societies and underdeveloped societies. We started this here in the Middle East among the scholars, both Yaşar, Kadir, and Deniz, and other scholars as well. So here you can see the global map of justice, social justice leadership discussion. If you can move to the next one. And we can see, of course, the main scholars that has been researching social justice, and of course distributed to the global map, as you can see. So among the names, Kathleen Shields, Theo Harris, as you can see, Ira Bogut, Blackmore, Fraser, etc. So I will not continue with naming other people. You can see also in North America and in the Middle East, among other scholars. So if you can please shift to the other. So, and of course, we are speaking in the 80s. We start to speak about equity, diversity. Then we move to speak about social justice in education. And within this started in the 85 to speak about leadership for social justice. And you can see here the issues around social justice leadership. So we speak about inclusive education, we speak about ethnicity, we speak about gender, diversity, moral leadership, different styles of leadership, transformational, distributive leadership, inclusive leadership. You can move from this. So this is, these maps gives you a very good overview of where it started geographically, which means socially, and then how it moves to other global entities, and what are the main themes that has been discussed. So you can move, please, to the next slide. So can you please move? Yeah, so here I made two ideological clarifications of the theory of social justice. So it's liberal democratic philosophy that started in Anglophonic societies mainly. And of course, it is also critical humanist philosophy. So these are the main two philosophies. In the meta-assertion of social justice is equal life, opportunity, autonomy, equal rights, and we know where these terms developed. And critically, it's respect for different identities. If we connect to the slide that Deniz shared, so we see here that in order to give equal opportunity, we need to recognize differences and of course include others. And here you can see the manifestation of social justice and inequity in education, and of course participation in education. As you can see the analysis, you can move forward, please. And social justice in education is both a process, so it's a means and it's an end. Social justice include vision of society, vision of equity in society and distribution, and of course self-determination and giving voices to different cultures and races, sexism, heterogenic, poverty, disability, and all kind of these qualities, equities in society. So if you can move, please. And the foundation I want to also problematize the foundation of social justice that mainly discussed by Fraser. So in order to seek social justice, as Fraser put it, we need to move toward cultural recognition of differences, cultural recognition of inequities, and then equal redistribution and economic wisdom. So it's not enough if we do not give each culture a space, if we not recognize each culture's characteristics and definitions. So if you can move please to the next slide. How can we make then difference, you know, in societies? There are no doubts concerning the crucial role of educators and school leaders in creating conditions of equity. So schools is foundational in improving social justice and in terms of processes, means, and ends, and it is one of the social entities that we can seek in education for social justice. If you can move, please. And if we reread social justice, it implies both our identity, our positioning, our self, and how we affiliate to them, to the other. So rereading the social and social justice and the boundaries and borders of social justice. If you can move to the next slide, so you can see here that there is a definite dichotomy between two structures of societies. One is traditional societies and the other is modern societies, and on between them we have societies on move, transitional societies. So these are the main features of traditional societies: collectivism, effective face-to-face, ascribe, particularistic orientation, autocratic, and maintenance. And in the next slide, you can see individual orientation, affective, achieved status, universalistic, democracy, change. So can we re-engineer social order in order to adapt to these theories that has been rooted and flourished in the West? And is social justice universally applicable in terms of values dominant to Western ideologies? Can we apply them to other ideologies? Is there a space to other social features in order to meet these prescribes of social justice? Can you move, please? So within these questions, we come and re-examine the role of educational. So Deniz spoke about, you know, educational leaders and administrators in Turkey. So we need to understand the social structure, the social features, the norms, in order to promote cultural framing and social justice, and re-examine the activist professional within their societies, within their structures, how they can support schooling, how they can support diverse schooling, how they can create vehicles of mobilization to their students, to their teachers, power relation and power sharing. And of course, the individual action that we can do, the collective and community action that we can create, school as and community. As Michael Fullan put it, give me a school and I can leverage or move the whole village and the whole community. So this interconnection between the self and the group and the social context is very important if you can move. And from here, what we can do with this, if we arrive with a liberal democratic philosophy of social justice too. Other societies with other features, we need to re-examine these terms, and we need to look critically to these societies in terms of humanist philosophy. By then, we can initiate different activist professionalism, both in terms of processes and structures, and re-examine different scales of injustice, and of course integrate and modify the structures. So the core terms that need to be examined is identity, affiliation, grouping, and mobilizing within the cultural and structural that represent each culture and society. If you can move, please. So here I want to use the term that Martin Luther King put very, very stark: injustice anywhere is a street to justice everywhere. So can I close my eyes and look to justice only in the United States or in the UK? And let us see, if you can please, let us see how all the liberal societies look to other, if you can move the slide, please, how we look to other global issues when we speak about, social justice. In one of my papers, I asked who creates the war agenda and who benefits from the war agenda, and what are our active stance towards the war that have been engaging different poor peoples in the world. So if you can move, please. And what are our stance? Can you please move? What our stance to this, sorry, can you get back? No, get back, please. Another one, yes. So what our stance to, no, forward, please, to these pictures. If you look to these pictures, and these are very, very stark pictures. So we see different disasters in the world, where we are as educators, where we are as social activists, where we are as scholars and intellectuals, how we defend the rights of these people, how we are open to receive these people, how we are critical towards these people in move and war-torn people, and who is responsible for this, or who are responsible for this
Khalid,
agenda of war.
Khalid,
Yeah.
I would like you to kind of wrap up.
Okay. To wrap up, so move, yes. Can you move, please? So if I want to wrap up from here, yeah, can you move forward, please? So yes, we have the two signs here. Are we welcome for men and women, all races, all abilities, all beliefs, all systems, all nations, as Jalaluddin Rumi put it? Or we say, oh, it's a fair, isn't fair issue, and it's a where everyone is getting what is they need in order to be successful. So where we are from these two signs, can you move? What are our main values, reflections toward equity, equality, and we need to explain why, of course. Can you move, please? Next, and next, please. So, and here we come and ask, conceptually, politically, and economically, are we up to this task of real world problems as educators, as intellectuals, as scholars, as there is no, can you, yes, upload? So in which university courses do you learn this knowledge and the required skills to re-examine social justice and injustice issues in the world, in schools and education? And to wrap up, move please, Yaşar. how do school leaders contribute to this issue? So it's about leadership, it's about cultural relevant leadership, it is mobilizing community, school community, and outside community with me. It's redefining our cultural lens towards cohesion, towards restructuring, towards providing equal processes and practices for social justice. And if you can move, so doing the work, how we can promote social justice education within the Imperium, how we can do the work of social justice, and how can we rethink social justice in complex circumstances. Can you move, please? And I will end up with, in this book, I try to examine social justice when we deal with immigrants, when we deal with the match between culture, immigration, how welcome we are toward migrants and refugees, how we examine spaces and transition and states, and where we are as scholars, as educators. Are we up to the task of social justice? Are we up to the task of inclusion? And of course, as you can see, it's developed here as a model of implementation, both in the school and in the community. And of course, it raises, further dilemmas of how to improve social justice. And in the end, just move for the last slide, please, and I can end in a half minute. And next one. So, in terms of modality, it is a culturally responsive leadership that school leaders can play, educators can play, teachers can play by self-criticaling a reflection of their understanding, their perceptions, their knowing, their perception of the political dynamic and the social structure, and how they want to deconstruct and reconstruct these realities towards socially just realities. What are our agency and actions that we are going to take in order to make the world more inclusive? And of course, what are the supports and the sustenance that we're going to adapt in order to seek social justice in society? So thank you very much for your patience and for listening. And I turn the stage to Yaşar to moderate if there is any question.
Thank you very much, Khalid. Actually, this is very inspiring. But before that, I would like to share your cam. Could you share your camera, Khalid?
Yes, I'm trying.
Khalid actually started with introducing the personal background in problematizing social justice. I think this is a very common tendency among social justice scholars, social justice leadership scholars, scholars who are working on social justice leadership. They use their own identities, their own background as a point of departure in problematizing about social justice in their own context. And of course, Khalid provided a very interesting, of course, results from their social network analysis in order to present the development of social justice in different geographies, the development of the concepts, and development of scholarship, global distribution of scholarship. I think the social network analysis will be very beneficial to understand the distribution and development of the distribution of scholarship and development of the key concepts of social justice in education and social justice leadership in education. And Khalid, of course, ended up with building cultural responsive leadership. Of course, Khalid asked very provocative questions, invited us to rethink about social justice issues in education, and of course, he put the cultural responsible leadership in the center of the discussions on social justice leadership. Now I would like to move to questions. We have several questions which arrived through our WhatsApp channel and the chat. I would like to ask İlyas Bey if you can share the question which arrived through the WhatsApp channel. But before that, we have a question first to Deniz and maybe to the other, to Kay and Khalid. Deniz, you said social justice isn't individualistic. However, it is very difficult to be understood by especially younger learners because of their developmental ages. So what kind of strategies or policies could we follow in order to make them internalize the concept and make them understand social justice in the broader term?
Yeah. What I mean by that is, I mean, when I said social justice is not an individualistic endeavor, I meant that it requires collective action and collaboration. I mean, it is about the norms and culture of the society. As you are familiar, Angel and Torrance has that book of Cultures of Social Justice, where they discuss the impact of culture and contextual influence on social justice practices. When we think about school leaders or teachers, they are mostly alone in their endeavor to promote social justice in the field, in schools or at universities. And what happens is, what I meant was, when because the society, I mean, especially Turkish society, forgot about their inherent values of collaboration and community support, it is now more difficult to catch up with the current problems, I mean, to address the current problems in terms of social injustices and inequalities in our country and in the world. For the young generations, I mean, this question was raised by a very young academic, I think. For the young generations, I would advise that they need to look for some, as Khalid also said, culturally relevant activities to, I mean, in their classrooms for the upcoming generations, to teach about those teamwork, collaboration, support mechanisms, why we need each other in a social community context. Such stuff cannot be taught through rough definitions. They need to be taught via experience. I mean, you need to make your students, or as a school leader, your staff, to experience the missing values through some activities, through some simulations. So there are different forms of activities that you can make people experience that. So it is not about, it's like democracy. You cannot learn democracy by memorizing 5 different definitions of it. So they need to have a hands-on approach to teach, to make them feel, and to practice such values like collaboration, trust, and support. Because although we are a very, I mean, in terms of Hofstede's cultural theory, although Turkish society is such a, I mean, we have a close culture. However, it is very significant that we don't have that collaboration in the workplaces. Okay, we do have it, but we cannot really put it into practice. It remains at some level where it shouldn't. So maybe revisiting the local customs, the good ones, and community support systems would be a good idea. I know that the young generation may not be very familiar with such concepts, but these needs to be revisited, I guess. I don't know if it's helpful.
I think the point you raised is very relevant. Actually, in your presentation, you indicated Ira Bogoch's argument about social justice.
Yes.
He commonly, repeatedly indicates that there is no common framework which is applicable to different settings.
No.
So we have to look for different terminologies, different practices, relevant for different contexts.
Yes.
So once again, this is, I understood in your response to this question. The second question, maybe we can start with Kay, because it is an issue, it's a burning issue, let me say, and especially our young scholars are very curious about how the ongoing COVID-19 crisis deepening the social justice issue in education, and probably which kind of ways we social justice scholars can we devise, can we develop in order to ensure social justice in education, especially in the current COVID-19 crisis. Kay, please, first you, and then maybe Khalid, if you would like to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. I think it's a very important question. I would just like to add something to what Denise was saying about individualism and collectivism and youngsters, actually. I think young people are very aware of what is just and what is unjust. I think it's very easy to teach children to recognize what they see as fair and what is not fair, and you only need classroom activities that happen as a matter of course to illustrate the point when you're teaching children about justice. I agree with the individual outcomes for individuals is actually more to do with the collective injustice in society. So experiences of discrimination occur because of the wider societal structural injustices that exist. And so we need to see it on multiple levels in terms of the individual and the macro level situation as well. With respect to COVID-19, I think it's been really interesting to think about the importance of community. And I've been conscious that in the UK, the responses of the local communities have been really very powerful. So in my own local community, some of you will be familiar with Cadbury's chocolate, I think. I think we probably get that the world over. Well, I live in the village. It's part of a city, but I live in the village where Cadbury's chocolate was first made. And so that's in Bourneville, which is also a name of one of their chocolates. So in Bourneville, we have a community group that mobilized very quickly to deliver food to vulnerable people. And I think that it's been very heartening to see that level of communitarianism taking place literally through the pandemic crisis. But that's one thing. Another thing is the problem of education with all these children who haven't been able to go to school, that they've been totally dependent on the internet. And not all our children in the UK have access to the internet, to Wi-Fi automatically. They don't have laptops. They might have gaming consoles, but they won't necessarily have the kind of hardware that's necessary for lessons online. So we see the private schools talking a great deal about their success in teaching online, and we don't see so much of that bravado from our public schools, because they know full well that there is a huge gap developing between the children who can access their learning online and the children who cannot. Similarly, it's about family background, isn't it? It's also about the children who are in families who are educated. So, you know, the children of teachers, doctors, etc., are going to have access to resources and learning in a way that some children are not. Another point I would make is about the potential negligence of children, the potential abuse of children. So we know that there are children who are incredibly vulnerable in our society, who actually have a safe haven when they come to school, who actually get fed when they come to school. So we have a system in the UK where we have free school meals. And one of the things that our government did quite quickly, well, relatively quickly, I would say, if they did anything quickly, relatively quickly, they started issuing vouchers to families to be able to buy the food that they would otherwise have got free in schools. So that's been something that's been on our agenda. But I know that educators, as they are now returning to school with the children, are holding special classes for catching up, because they've lost months of their education, and they are trying, I've seen some trying to talk to children about what they've learned, you know, seeing it as a positive experience, that they will have had different experiences, they'll have had more family time, that hopefully is a positive thing, that they will have actually learned differently and trying to value those experiences. But I think it's been dreadful for exposing all those inequalities that exist throughout society. That the vulnerable populations, you know, they are dependent. They're determined by characteristics. So our elderly have died disproportionately, and our black and minority ethnic populations have died disproportionately. And so, you know, those existing structural inequalities have been further exposed by COVID-19. Whether in the long term that will be a good thing so that we address it better, I don't know. In the short term, it's just absolutely dreadful. So I hope that begins to answer some of the
thank you, Kay.
Question.
Actually, the point that you raised around communitarism is very critical. And actually, in Deniz's presentation, she indicated a different version of communitarism as a way to respond to the social justice need in the society. However, concerning education, I think it seems from what you indicated, it seems that we are experiencing similar problems. There is a huge divide, and the motto that rised at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, like the virus treats everyone in the same way, is not valid at all. So we need to develop different ways to reinstitute social justice, especially in education. And you indicate some public, let me say, tools in order to ensure social justice in education.
Yaşar, you are muted.
Yeah, sorry. We have a specific question for Khalid from Sayed Han Demirda, a colleague at Bülent Ecevit University in Turkey. As a displaced person and as an educator in the United States, would you share some of your vital experiences you had with your co-workers at your university? I think they mean Texas State University, Khalid. in terms of social justice? Thanks. Thank you.
That's really interesting and it's personal, but you know, man chooses where to affiliate and to connect, and you know, rarely I choose to connect and affiliate to a department where social justice and equity is a core. So working with Duncan Waite, with Megwell, with Kusharik, with Michael O'Malley. So these are scholars of social justice, and with Martinez, Melissa Martinez. So it is, I mean, there is a space for others. There is an understanding for others. Also, the compositions of students brings to the fore, you know, diversify students, while most of students are, about half of students are Latinos, Afro-Americans, you know, and people come from different affiliations, from different religions. So there is a space, I mean, diversity is vivid, while the structure of society is also vivid strongly. But on between the two, I think, you know, I'm affiliated. I'm afraid, you know, for the future of the state with this administration, as there are, you know, there are losses of their democratic regimes and very basic structures, and this, you know, the democratic state is weak, and we can see how weak it is when you have, you know, insane leaders leading. We can see this in Israel. We can see this in the United States. So, the democratic structure is very, very, very weak, and it is, you know, badly used with these two people. You know, so I can say, you know, that I didn't move from, you know, from a good place to a better one. You know, I'm a Palestinian, I'm a minority, so I have been facing here a very harsh time, and time personally, in terms of family, in terms of my nation. So, so we need to find a place in the world, and we need to advocate. And I can find, you know, that communities always, you know, are waiting for, you know, intervenence, always waiting, you know, for mobilization, and you always can find a place to empower others. I always say that you can, you know, stretch your hands around and move and around you to try to empower others, to leverage others, you know, support others, and this gives you a meaning of both life, of advocacy, and also as intellectual. So, yeah, I hope I answered a bit.
Thank you, Khalid. Actually, in your presentation, Kay, she also started her presentation with introducing multiple identities. So I think this is very critical. Our personal backgrounds and the identities that we identify for ourselves are critical in undertaking the role and responsibility of ensuring social justice in education. Kay, we have a question specific for you. The question is, what differences have you detected about Islamic feminism in non-Islamic versus Islamic countries?
So thank you for the question. And I think it is clear that they are quite different. I think I want to say that Islamic feminism really locates feminism in the Quran and the teachings of Islam. That's very clear, and that's quite different from thinking about gender justice interests of Muslims. I think that that's a different perspective. And I think that in a country like the UK and probably US, Australia, where Muslims are in the minority, then it is really quite a different situation. It's a different experience for a woman. So I suppose I'm interested that some Islamic scholars, some women, reject the idea of Islamic feminism and see it as an oxymoron, because they don't think that they should use the word feminism, because they see it as a Western concept. They see it as a white women's Western concept and reject it entirely. Some people do. Other people appropriate it and make it do what they want it to do for them in terms of gender justice. The women I interviewed in English schools were very different in terms of their background. One had been born in a Middle Eastern country and had migrated as a baby, and had been, so then she was educated in the English education system. The other two had been born in the UK and were educated in the English education system, but their parents had moved to the UK. So I would say they were second generation in terms of moving to England. And I think that the time at which I did those interviews was a very difficult time, because it was around the time of this huge furore in the UK about the education of Muslim children. And so schools in my city were accused of radicalizing young people. In the event, there was no evidence of that. But they used gender issues to attack the Muslim community, to attack, in particular, Muslim men. So I think that's the huge difference, is that gender is used as a weapon in a non-Islamic country in a way that is just totally different in an Islamic country. And I think that there is a beginning literature around Islam and gender, and I'm thinking of the work of my colleague Saeed Ashar and Melanie Brooks, and the special issue that Khalid contributed to of the Journal of Educational Administration and History. And there's a collection of articles about Islam and leadership that I think are very powerful in beginning a discourse to recognize that these Western built concepts and theories are not necessarily particularly useful the world over. And I'm thinking of Eugene Samier's work as well about, critiquing from a post-colonial perspective the field of educational leadership. So I think that so they are completely different, and I have to be very careful about how I frame all of that, and I hope that I do that justice in that chapter in the book. But thank you for the question. That's an important question.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you for your detailed answer. Our last question, I think I can forward this to Deniz, because it is related to kind of integrating social justice topics to teacher training. The question is, I want to ask about teacher training programs. There is a new optional course as inclusive education. I think this is for Turkish context. Do you offer any application or any ideas for student teachers? So I understand the question is how to integrate social justice leadership or social justice in education into teacher training programs. Deniz?
Yeah. Actually, that course is inclusive education course. In contrast to its name, most of the time we see content about strategies to address students with special needs. like hyperactivity, and like deaf student, blind student. It just covers one part of inclusive education. However, when we think about other social and cultural and other marginalized groups, actually, as far as I know, those courses do not really include that social justice, cultural relevant leadership, or culturally responsive pedagogies. So I think they need to be reconsidered. The content need to be reconsidered. This is my view. Also, I mean, in my case, in the courses I deliver, like foundations of education, especially in classroom management, and even in the Turkish education system, courses related with Turkish education system, I try to include the topic into my course and integrate it with the social problems, taking a social constructivist pedagogy, carrying out some discussions, some case studies with my students. However, I think it is not a standardized situation all over Turkey.
I think we have to think about this topic in relation to teacher training.
Yes. I mean, in terms of graduate programs, in the MA and PhD programs, yes, we do that in at least grad programs. However, with undergrads, it is just personal effort and endeavor.
Right. So thank you very much, especially, I mean, Kay and Khalid. It is a big unfortunate that we are not able to meet in person, but I took a promise from the organizer of this conference. For next year, they are organizing the conference in person in Antalya, and hopefully we will all meet together there and share our ideas, our knowledge, our research in person in Antalya after we pass through these strange days. Kay, I'm closely working with Khalid. We have several different projects, but it is a great pleasure to meet you. And I'm looking forward to meet you in person as well. And Deniz, thank you very much. Your introduction of Turkish context is very relevant. Khalid, your presentation on the key concepts, I think, is very valuable on the for the scholars. In Kay's presentation, multiple identities and intersectionality, I think this is a very valuable perspective for the scholars who are interested in the issues of social justice. So I can take your last words and we can close this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in COVID-free days in person.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
very much.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Yaşar.
much.
Thank you, Kay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Yaşar. Thank
Bye.
you, Deniz. See you.
Thank
See
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Eğitim ve sosyal adalet panelimiz sona ermiştir. Moderatörümüz ve panelistlerimize değerli katkıları için teşekkür ederiz. Kongremiz saat 15.45'ten itibaren bildiri sunumları ile devam edecektir.